Mr. Bevington, seconded by Mr. Malloway, moves that Bill C-530, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Act, borrowing limits, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development. Debate. The Honourable Member for the Western Arctic.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to stand here today as the first time I've had the opportunity to put forward a private member's bill for debate, and it's certainly something that I'm sure every MP looks forward to in his career here in Parliament. Members of this House have heard me say many times how the people of the Northwest Territories want to be masters in their own land. And I think that's something that we aspire to, just as in every province people have that right and privilege. I've spoken about how the NWT is a mature jurisdiction and shouldn't be controlled by Ottawa. Members have also heard me mention that the people of the Northwest Territories know that their requirement for infrastructure is one of the keys to building a better North, a more prosperous North, and a North that can better share with Canada. My Bill C-530 is a small step towards achieving these aspirations. Mr. Speaker, as many members already know, the Northwest Territories is a creation of this House, much like Canada was a creation of the British House of Commons. Currently, under the Northwest Territories Act, before the NWT can borrow any money, it must first ask permission of the federal cabinet. By practice, the cabinet has set a limit up to which the territory may borrow. Currently, the limit is $500 million. This is just a recent increase from the previous limit of $300 million, an increase which took years of lobbying, persuading the bureaucracy, working hard to accomplish. Unfortunately, when the lobbying started all those years ago, $500 million was sufficient. Today, it barely meets the needs of the territory and will not be adequate for the future. However, even though it was nowhere near sufficient because the increase was so badly needed when the limit was increased in 2007, the territorial government said in a press release, "This is a significant step in providing the GNWT with flexibility to make strategic investments in infrastructure to improve the life of Northerners." Obviously, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't quite enough. And Mr. Speaker, what my bill does is provide the Northwest Territories with a line of credit, which then it can use to finance the building of vital infrastructure, the ensuring that our territory progresses in a good fashion. My bill outlines a formula for borrowing, the borrowing limit for the Northwest Territories government, a formula based on gross revenues applied every year. The figure that we have set for the percentage of gross revenues is 70%. So the government of Northwest Territories, at any one time, if my bill passes, will be able to borrow up to 70% of its gross revenues of that year. In totality, the debt is in totality, of course. That would be the total debt that it's allowed to hold would be 70% of the gross revenue of any particular year. So, what's the government going to do with this borrowing power? Well, Mr. Speaker, Canada has many aspirations for the Northwest Territories and its development. It has, we've heard the Minister of Environment speak eloquently many times about the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline. Well, part of what we need to do to develop the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline is develop a Mackenzie Highway. This will cut the cost of the pipeline, and it will be an essential component for our vision of the Northwest Territories and the vision that our government in the Northwest Territories carries today. Connecting all the communities of the Mackenzie Valley with an all-weather road would reduce living costs for residents and open up the rest of the Mackenzie Valley and provide the opportunity for a planned and careful development of our resources in that area. This is essential to us, but it is very expensive. The Tulsen Hydro Project is another example. We're moving ahead quickly to provide hydroelectric power to the diamond mines, which provide large amounts of revenue to the federal government and which provide jobs and business opportunities in the Northwest Territories. But their costs are very high because they use diesel fuel for all their power needs. we proposed and has gone through environmental assessment, the Tulsen hydro project. But its cost is in excess of $500 million, Mr. Speaker. And without better fiscal capacity within the government of Northwest Territories, it's going to be very difficult for the people of the Northwest Territories to own this resource. So once again, we see the need for the government of Northwest Territory to have flexibility and fiscal capacity in order to accomplish projects that actually are self-financing, like the Tulsen project. Mr. Speaker, even if a project is self-financing and is owned by the government of Northwest Territories, it goes against its borrowing limit. So we are shackled right now by this borrowing limit that's in place. Another example is the road to Tuktoyaktuk, a project that the previous Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development thought was a great project. He put money into the feasibility work that was going on. We've got the project up to a point where it can go to environmental assessment. But it is a $100 million investment to tie in Tuktoyaktuk with Inuvik. This would give us year-round access to the port of Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic Ocean, something that will assist in every fashion with the development of the North. Where's the money going to come from for this? How can the government of Northwest Territories make arrangements with the federal government, shared projects, work together with other interests to create these projects without fiscal capacity that is available to it when it needs it? There are many, many more examples, Mr. Speaker, and I can't really use up all my time in them. The Liard Highway, the need for upgrading of the Liard Highway at about $50 million in order to bring tourists into Nahanni National Park, which this government supported in its expansion 2 years ago. But we do need to improve the access into that area in order to make that World Heritage Site available to Canadians and make a tourist opportunity there to a greater extent than we have today. Mr. Speaker, through these vital infrastructure projects and many others, the Northwest Territories will be able to begin developing its full potential. Infrastructure is important. We also need to look at our communities, and many of the communities need infrastructure in order to provide a comparable standard of living to other communities across this great nation. We want that for our communities. We need to invest in our communities to make that possible. So there are some of the fundamental reasons why we want to see the change in this borrowing limit. We need the money. We need the opportunity, the fiscal capacity, the ability of our government to do this. Now, why should we trust this government? Why should we? Because we're in the midst right now, and negotiators for the government of Northwest Territories in Canada have recommended the acceptance of a draft agreement in principle transferring administration and control of lands and resources from Canada to the Northwest Territories. We call that devolution. Well, there's much work to be done on this yet, and there's many parties in the Northwest Territories that have to come together on this agreement, and that's no doubt. But this is the closest we've come in a very long time to getting an agreement. Once devolution is complete, people of the Northwest Territories will become masters in their homeland to a greater extent than we had before, and to an extent that is almost similar to that of the provinces. But to reap the benefits from devolution, we need to invest in our territory. This is not going to happen without that investment, and my bill provides a vital tool to achieve that. The first line of the AIP says, whereas to enhance the ability of the government of Northwest Territories to serve the interests of its constituents. This is my reason as well for bringing forward this bill. It is not in the interest of the people of Northwest Territories to have its government come forward on regular intervals to beg Ottawa for an increase in the amount it has to borrow. This is not responsible government. This is not the kind of relationship that we want to have with Ottawa. This is not the way that Canadians should be treated in this land today. On March 26th of this year, Moodys Investment Services gave the Northwest Territories a AA1 rating. This rating is its second highest and places the NWT in line for credit risk with most of the provinces. In fact, higher than many of the provinces. This is the second year in a row that Moody's has issued the NWT such a high rating. Moody's Rating takes into account recent developments related to the Decho Bridge project. So a project that was somewhat controversial is under this rating. The credit opinion notes that Moody's had already included the Decho Bridge liability in their calculations of the NWT's net direct and indirect debt, reflecting the government's debt-like obligation to make periodic available payments. As such, formal assumption that the related debt is not expected to alter the NWT credit profile in a material way. According to Moody's, the rating reflects prudent fiscal policies that have over the past several years limited debt accumulation, a well-developed fiscal framework, including a fiscal responsibility policy which guides the NWT's fiscal policies and use of debt. This should help to ensure that the debt burden remains low and affordable. The NWT's fiscal responsibility policy mandates how the NWT may borrow. This policy guides NWT fiscal policies and use of debt and includes guidelines respecting the type of activities for which the debt can be issued, as well as limits on total debt and debt servicing costs to ensure affordability. What a remarkable thing for a small territory to do. Under this policy, affordable debt is considered that which the annual debt servicing payments do not exceed 5% of total annual revenues. Infrastructure debt has to be paid off within 20 years. Debt for self-liquidating investments will be repaid from new revenues, such as user fee tolls or expenditure savings. Debt incurred to finance repayable loan programs will be repaid from cash generated from the loan repayments and corresponding interest revenue. Mr. Speaker, our territory is responsible. It's acting in a manner that many other provinces should emulate. Yet, at the same time, we don't have the fiscal capacity to do the things that we need to do for our territory. Mr. Speaker, I hope that this Parliament will join with me in giving the territory, the Northwest Territory, the tools it needs to build a strong and beautiful part of Canada. In the words of the Honourable Floyd Rowland, when as Minister of Finance, he said, "The borrowing limit flies in the face of the principle of territorial political autonomy. It reflects an outdated and unreasonable view that we cannot make sound financial decisions on our own." Mr. Speaker, my bill brings an end to this outdated and unreasonable situation. Thank you very much.